Happy Sabbath, everybody.
Happy Sabbath.
So, there was a guy named Dave Thomas, and he was the fellow who started the chain called Wendy's. So, in America, we have McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's. I've never seen Wendy's in Korea, but Dave Thomas was horrified at the idea of being on camera. He was so nervous, and he didn't feel right, but somebody gave him some advice. Just be yourself, you know? And so, public speaking isn't one of my talents. However, like Dave Thomas, I kind of just be myself and talk to whoever I'm talking to like I'm having a conversation with friends, which is the truth. And really, you know, Jesus, he befriended people, and then he reached them. So, anyways, my topic today is called Flashlights and the Shadows of Lost History. Let me explain that. Flashlights is a method of research into the Bible and into ancient Egyptian history. So, the Bible is one flashlight, and ancient Egyptian history is another flashlight. Used together, we can find out a lot of information about both the Bible and ancient history that we thought were lost to history, that were just shadows. So let's go ahead and go to our first slide here. So maybe I'm pressing the wrong button here. Let's see here. Okay.
One more time. There you go. Keep it.
Okay. So we have these two interesting characters. One is well known. Initially, his name was. Initially, his name was Tutankhamun, and Aten was a sun god. But his name was changed to Tutankhamun. The guy below him is his father, Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV. He is called the heretic pharaoh because he made a great effort to change Egypt from being a country that worshipped many gods to worshipping one god. Now, I wonder where he got that idea from. Now, the experts will tell us that Akhenaten was, that there's no connection, but Akhenaten, what he did in changing Egypt from polytheism to monotheism was inspired by the Israelites. But we'll get into that later. Why was Tutankhamun's name changed? What basic information do we have about him? So, is there a biblical connection to the change of Tutankhamun? There is. Let's go to the next one. So here we have some pictures. Some of these are ones that I took. In the bottom left, we see the whole of the burial chamber of Tutankhamun. That picture was taken at Sangachi when last year there was an exhibit from November to April, and it was the treasures of Tutankhamun. And you can see that there's Korean written there. Now, to the right, you can see Howard Carter. Howard Carter is the guy bending down. The guy with the turban is a tomb worker, and the other fellow, I forgot his name. And where they are in this area, this hallway area between. So they are right in front of the burial chamber. Where they are, they're about to go into the burial chamber itself. And that, what you see on the top left, is what they would have seen when they looked into the burial chamber. So there's a lot of interesting details there. Let's see here. So let me go back once. Okay, so This is what he had to say. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. Widening the hole a little, I inserted a candle. Now, this would be at the entrance of the corridor. Not the entrance, but in the hallway just before the doors. Presently, the details of the room emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues of gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. For a moment, an eternity it must have seemed. To others standing by, I was struck dumb with amazement. And Howard Carter, the financier, said, and he could hardly contain he was very impatient, "What do you see? Can you see anything?" And he said, "It was all I could do to say, yes, wonderful things." So, we have here several pictures. The first on the top left is the Valley of the Kings. And they have a nice little cafe directly ahead. You can see there. And to the right is a picture of the tomb of Tutankhamun. But when you go on a tour like that, you have to pay a certain amount of money for all of the tours. But going into Tutankhamun's tomb was more expensive. So I didn't do that because I was on a budget. Maybe another time when it's not so hot. And there, next to that, is a picture of the Nile River. And next, top right is Lord Carnarvon, as he's called, and his home was that building that's known as Highclere Castle in Yorkshire in the UK. And that was where he is from. Now, you can see a statue in the bottom middle of Tutankhamun and his wife, whose name I'm not going to say because it's too long. I forgot it. Anyways, so Howard Carter has an interesting connection to Adventism. So, there have been many B-movies made about the pharaohs and the curse of the pharaohs and all sorts of nonsense. But it is true that most of the people who worked in Tutankhamun's tomb died not long thereafter. It has been speculated by some historians that there were radioactive elements in the tomb, and that would cause some people to die early. Howard Carter didn't die early. He lived quite a ways after. But part of the reason was that he went back to the United States because he was very ill, you know? And he went to a place called Madison, which was an Adventist sanitarium. And he was healed partly at Madison. Anyways, I have to look at my notes here, make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we have here, why was Tutankhamun's name changed? Some people call Akhenaten a little bit eccentric. He was a little odd, a little strange. And it was Akhenaten who named his son Tutankhaten. Got to wrap my tongue around those words. But later Akhenaten would die, and Tutankhamen's name would be changed to Tutankhamun. Why was that name changed? Before we go into that, Aten was the sun god that Akhenaten brought into existence. He wanted all Egypt to stop worshipping all the other gods and worship only Aten. So part of his name is Akhenaten, and he named his son Tutankhamenon. And you can see the bust of his very famous wife, Nefertiti. I didn't say that right, but you know who I'm talking about. And I believe the Berlin Museum, I think. And he was called a heretic pharaoh. And later dynasties would vilify Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, for that change. Why was his name changed? So the character you can see on the far right is a statue of Joseph, the biblical character. Let's go to the next slide. So there are a lot of very interesting places in Egypt, of course, but one in the northern part, it's called, I forgot the name of it now, the Sharqiya Governorate, and in that place there was an archaeological field, an archaeology project, probably 20 years ago, where they did a lot of excavation. They found a statue that was 9 feet tall. Not a queen, not a king. And this statue was very unusual. It was in its own tomb chapel with a little pyramid on top. Nobody, there were only royalty were permitted to have a connection to the pyramids. But this guy was different. And you can see on the bottom, he has kind of a mushroom-shaped haircut. And we believe that this was the character Joseph, a gift from a pharaoh who was thankful because Joseph was partly responsible for the salvation of Egypt. And it was Joseph who was partly responsible for Tutankhamun's name being changed. Partly responsible. Let me explain why. So first, if you look down there, in the archaeological site that they found 12 tombs. They found a very large Canaanite palace. It was not Egyptian, it was a palace, but not for an Egyptian, which was very unusual. In Egypt, they only made palaces for Egyptians. Why would they make it for anybody else? But this area, the 12 tombs, the architecture of the palace was northern Syria, where Joseph would have been born, probably. And so everything about this place tells us this was where Joseph lived. And he and his brothers were all buried there. So let's go to another slide. Now, they did a number of excavations. In the first excavation, they discovered a house that was kind of not really fancy, but not really. It was Canaanite, northern Syrian, and then they excavated further and they found the picture that you see to the bottom right, and it was a palace with 12 pillars, many gardens, lots of room. It was a place for a high-ranking official. And on the statue, which has disappeared, not surprisingly, they found traces of a multicolored coat. They found the hair was red. Red hair. This guy had red hair. And everything that we can see about this area points to Joseph. And I wanted to go there when I was there, but I was afraid of traveling in Egypt because they don't have any rules. Everybody just drives. And so, anyways, so let's go to the next one. I hope I didn't miss a slide. So, you can see on the bottom, in the middle, there is a statue of a guy called Amenemhet III. And briefly, I lived in this country about 20 years ago, and I had a point in time where I had a lot of personal problems, and it was very difficult for me to live here. So I ordered a book on Amazon, and it came, and I read it 5 times in a row, because as long as I was reading, I didn't have to think about everything that was going on. And I read it, and the author of this book, Terry Fivish, is a historian. I was fortunate enough to meet her a couple years ago. And she put forth the theory that the pharaoh who Joseph knew was a guy named Amenemhet III. Amenemhet III is interesting. All of his statues look alike. They all look alike. You can say that he takes a rather serious view on life, you know? And the guy next to him, Tutmosis III, an interesting name, Tutmosis III. We'll discuss him later. And then there's Tutankhamun, of course, top left. How would Joseph have been connected with Tutankhamun's name being changed? How would that work? Let's go ahead and take a further look at it. No, I missed the slide. I don't know how I missed the slide, but I did. Oh, there's the slide I missed. Okay, so on the bottom, you can see the priest to the bottom left. You can see the pharaoh, Akhenaten, and I don't have a picture here, but you have 3 power centers in ancient Egypt. And I forgot to include a picture of the nobles. I made a mental note. Don't forget to put a picture of nobles in there. But I couldn't find anything on that. And I made a note to look, but I never did. So you have the nobles, you have the priests, and you have the pharaoh. Each of these 3 had a lot of power. But as Terry 5 says, in the 12th dynasty, which is the dynasty hold on, forgot his name. Which is the dynasty of Amenemhet III, the nobility disappeared. They're gone. You don't see them again for the rest of Egyptian history, which leaves 2 groups of power, or you have the pharaoh and you have the priests. So when you come down to the reign of Tutankhamun, the priests were all very upset at Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten. He had said Egypt is going to worship one god, it's going to be Aten, it's not going to be Amun. Well, the priests of Amun were very powerful, and they were very upset. But they couldn't really do anything. Akhenaten had a lot of power. Well, it was a lot. And they had to do what the pharaoh said. But of course, now Akhenaten, he chose a new capital and he built a new city and a new capital. But of course, Akhenaten died. And after some time, his son, Tutkhenaten, came on the throne. But at this point, the priests of Amun were very powerful. There were no more nobles. And young Tutankhamun, 9 years old, what could he do? And the priests were able to force the young pharaoh to change his name from Tutkhenaten to Tutankhamun. So today we know him as Tutankhamun. Now, the nobles were not around at this point. They were not there. That was during the 12th dynasty. And when we come to the 18th dynasty with Tutankhamun, you had the priests and you had the pharaoh. And let's go ahead and take a look at Genesis 47:20. Shall we turn there? Genesis 47:20. Genesis 47:20. Okay. So this is talking about Joseph and the nobles of Egypt, and everybody, and other people as well. Joseph bought all, verse 20, Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For the Egyptians sold every man his field because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. Now, history strongly suggests, up to this point, that the nobles and the pharaoh were constantly butting heads. They were constantly trying to get more power. Pharaoh had advantages. He had a lot of power. But the nobles had advantages, and they had a lot of power. But during the reign of during the time of Joseph, the nobles disappeared. And the Bible tells us why. Now, Egyptian history cannot tell us why the nobles disappeared. it does not give us an answer. So we use one flashlight, the Bible, to look at ancient Egyptian history. And the Bible tells us why the nobles disappeared. Now, at other times, the Bible doesn't give us specific information. It gives us what we need to know and what is good for us to know, but it doesn't satisfy our curiosity, and that's not the main point. But when we look at Egyptian history, it is also a flashlight on the Bible, but of course a much lesser light. Anyways, so let's go to verse 21. And for the people he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Only, verse 22, only the land of the priests bought he not. For the priests had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. It says that only the priests didn't lose their lands, but everybody else did, including the nobles. So in a way, Joseph was partly responsible for the fact that Tutankhamun's name had changed, because it was Joseph that broke the power of the nobles. And they can never appear on the scene of Egyptian history again. They're there, but it's like, downsizing them quite a bit. There were a few nobles, but none with the power to challenge Pharaoh again. So, let me go look at my notes here. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next one. I have a very good friend who's a canvassing director in Cairo. And he would take me to places, and I tried to drive a manual once in Seoul. It was a little scary. But my friend was a very aggressive driver, and he would just drive like them, and the other drivers would yell at him, and he would yell at them. And they would yell at him, "Why are you going so slow?" And then he would say, "Why are you going so slow?" And back and forth. And I was just happy to sit there and not worry about it. So my friend drove me to the pyramids, and at the pyramids, there were so many people there who were trying to be a tour guide. Oh, let me help you. And they would give you, take a gift. But they would want things for their gifts. And I met an honest tour guide, and he said to me, "Don't pay attention to any of the other tour guides. And if they give you a gift, give it back. Just ignore them." And I was very fortunate. So I followed this tour guide's advice. And I ignored everybody, but people were trying to give me gifts. People were always coming up to me, "Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy that?" I got on a camel once, and I said to the guy, "He's not getting up." "Right, this camel's not getting up." "Oh, no, the camel's not getting up." Okay, so I get on the camel, and the camel gets up. And, and they get up like this. Their back end goes like this. Whoop. And so you're right here, and I'm holding on to this like here, and I say, "Hey, he's getting up, and they're smiling, looking at me, and they get all the way up. And so I'm standing here I'm on this camel that's standing, and I'm very nervous, and I yell at them, "Make him sit down." So I got down, and after that I didn't talk to anybody. I just went on my way to be patient. And I had to have sunglasses because it's just too bright. Let me go back one slide. So when I speak here at some other point, I don't know when. Okay. So I will go more into the sort of things that I've been studying. There is so much information. Using the flashlight method, we can say with some accuracy who the Egyptian mother of Moses was. And she was a very well-known queen and pharaoh in her own right. And Hollywood and society have a certain narrative. You're never going to see a story about a knight rescuing a princess and a dinosaur walks on there. You know, it can't be a dinosaur; it's got to be a dragon, right? And if it's a book about science, you're never going to see a dragon in a book about science. Dragons are for fairy tales, and dinosaurs are for science. So, Hollywood has spent more than $500 million on films and animations that are completely about the Exodus and about Moses. Of course, most of them are not accurate. And we've come to accept that, you know, what they say, Ramses was the pharaoh of the Exodus. But when we use the flashlight method, we realize that's not true. Ramses lived quite a ways after the events of the Exodus. Ramses was a powerful pharaoh, and he did defeat a lot of enemies. But another pharaoh, trying to get it to go back. Anyways, another pharaoh, Tutmosis III, never lost one battle. He fought more battles than any other pharaoh, 17, never lost one. And Tutmosis III is an interesting pharaoh because his statues are found all over Egypt, but none of them look the same. They have the same cartouche, the same stamp that, oh, this is, you know, and Ramses took several of the statues of Tutmosis and put his name on them. But you can still see Tutmosis' cartouche in there. Tutmosis III never lost a single battle. He won every single one. He defeated everybody around Egypt. He was probably the most powerful pharaoh. It makes sense that he would be very proud and very stubborn, and he would not give up. And Egyptian history does not tell us how he died. They don't know. When you go to where the mummies are in the Cairo Museum, you can see his mummy there, and they don't know how he died. But if you read the Bible, and if you read about the incident at the Red Sea, you can guess how he died looking at his mummy. His mummy has classic telltale signs that he died from drowning and by pulverization. He was, you know, the rocks, you know, he was, dashed against the rocks. And there's a lot more information about him that shows that he was, in all likelihood, the pharaoh of the Exodus. You know, so much information. His first son died under mysterious circumstances. But there's so much interesting information, and I don't know everything. I have a lot to learn. This man you see here is a guy named Leopold von Ranke. It's kind of a strange name. He was a contemporary of Karl Marx, who I can't say enough bad things about. And he was a devout Christian. And Leopold von Ranke said, if you're going to make a theory, take all of the evidence you can possibly get your hands on, organize it, and bring a theory from that. And that's what I have done in what I have been studying. And I don't know everything, and I make mistakes, but I'm praying, and I believe that God will continue to bless me. And we look at the Exodus, and we look at it, and it's an interesting story, but we don't really understand the gravity of it. Some of the Israelites probably thought, we're never going to get out of here. How can we get out of here? This Pharaoh, who's over us, has never been defeated. He's got the biggest army in the world. But of course, God did defeat the Pharaoh. And and there is so much interesting information. But, sometimes we're tempted to think, how can we ever be free of sin? we can never be free of sin. But the Israelites thought, some of them, how could we ever be free of this Pharaoh, who's so mighty and so strong and so powerful? But God was able to overcome Pharaoh. And God can overcome the sins in our hearts and lives. We just have to ask Him to do that. And we have to know, well, with God, all things are possible. And it may not happen in a day, but we're a work in progress. And like God overcame the Pharaoh, God can overcome the sin in our life and the enemy of souls. And sometimes it seems hard sometimes to really grasp that, to really accept it. But it's true whether we accept it or not. And if we ask God to bring His power to bear in our hearts and lives, He'll set us free too. Anyways, thank you very much. Hopefully in the future I can share more interesting stuff about Egypt. It's a very interesting topic to me. My wife will tell you, sometimes I talk about little else.
Amen.
Father God, we pray that you would go with us through the rest of the week and that you would help us to remember that nobody is beyond your power to save and heal. And we ask, Father, that you would overcome the enemy in our hearts and lives and minds. And we thank you and we pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.